Happy spring season if you're in the northern hemisphere, and happy fall season if you are in the southern hemisphere. This is Margaret Byrd and welcome to Color Quest. Today we're going to be looking at a festive springtime activity in the north, and that is dyeing Easter eggs. Now last year I had a video here. If you haven't seen, go check that out for some different ideas from today's video. I used some of the same natural dyes, but I did a slightly different process and I thought the results turned out beautifully. Today, we're going to look at a combination of things in the natural dyers world, including some different teas, as well as some foraged items, some of which I've tried, others I have not, and some were wonderful gifts from one of our viewers here, and that is Marilyn from Florida. Thank you. So let's start the process and get ready for the bunny, who is on its way to bring some cheer in the way of naturally dyed eggs. Easter eggs. Natural dyes and Easter eggs are an incredible way to incorporate some organic color into a project that's fun for a seasonal project or with kids. And what I'm doing today is I have picked out a series of different types of natural dye matter, some of which I made last week in a video around hibiscus that Marilyn from our Color Quest community sent me in a box. She also sent me some Bougainvillea. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well, because I've had video on how to make dye from Bougainvillea. But these are a random selection of things I've been curious about in terms of dye for eggs. Now, last year in my Color Quest video for eggs, I used hibiscus, which is here, but I used dried hibiscus. And this is hibiscus used for food prep and makes a much redder, pinker color than the hibiscus that I made last week, which was from fresh garden flowers. So that's some leftover dye that I saved for today's project. Then I was rummaging through my refrigerators filled with dye sources, and I found this. This is blackberry dye from blackberries that I foraged last summer and dyed wooden beads with. I still had that. It had some mold on top. I just scraped it off, and we're going to be trying that out. I also have one of my favorite amazing blue colors that isn't actually a great dye for fibers is blue butterfly pea. It makes a gorgeous blue color. It is fugitive, but I've tried it with eggs before and I have had some beautiful blues. And since Easter eggs aren't going to hang around for a long time, you don't have to worry as much about fugitive colors. I also have a tea bag form of blue butterfly pea that I have used in the past. So I'm going to make both the tea as well as the dried flowers and see if they create a different color. I'm going to do the same here with dried Jamaica hibiscus as well as with a tea. So we'll see if they make different colors. Finally, I'm adding in blue elderberry. I have never had this before. I purchased it from an organic source and they are dried, but I've been super curious to see what elderberry will make in terms of a dye, and I think it will be a great option for Easter eggs. And then back to the Bougainvillea, I'll go through that process, but you can see a couple of different videos where I've used Bougainvillea to coax color out of the flowers themselves, and I'm super curious to see what they will do with eggs. Now, I have eggs here, and this year I'm gonna try dyeing both brown eggs and white eggs, because the dyes themselves are going to interact differently and it'll be like over dyeing. So we'll be able to increase, hopefully, our palette and see what variations we get with these different colors. Now, the other things I'm going to need for this are vinegar, and we'll talk a little bit more about vinegar, but just know that whenever you dye Easter eggs, you use vinegar. If you know the reason why, drop me a note down in the description. We'll talk a little bit more about how I use vinegar in my dye practice. You'll need jars in order to put the eggs in with the dye. We are going to be doing this cold overnight. We'll start off, however, by making the dyes that aren't already made, and we'll be doing that with heat. And just to save energy, I'm going to add the eggs in to boil the eggs with the dyes themselves, get them started, and then we will be putting them into jars and then letting them sit in the fridge overnight and see what kind of colors we get. And of course, we have this measuring spoon for our vinegar. All right, let's get to making some Easter eggs. So before we start working on our eggs, I want to talk to you about vinegar. Now, vinegar, if you've been dyeing Easter eggs as long as I have, is always part of the recipe. You place vinegar into the bowl that you're going to be dyeing before you put those little tablets in. I totally researched up and down and over and sideways, trying to figure out what the purpose of vinegar was when it comes to dyeing Easter eggs. And to be honest with you, it was hard to find an answer. However, I know vinegar as a pH modifier, meaning that when I put vinegar into my dye pot, I'm doing that in order to play around with the pH of the dye, take it into an acidic state, and for a bunch of different dyes, that will change the color. It might only be a slight difference, but some colors are pH sensitive. Therefore, in this video, we're going to be using vinegar because you always use vinegar when you're dyeing Easter eggs. I think it does have something to do with the shell and allowing the shell to be open to receiving color. However, because we're using natural dyes, the vinegar may also play a role in shifting the color. It's actually kind of exciting. You never know. Now, for the dyes that I already have made, and that is the hibiscus as well as the blackberry, I'm going to go ahead and put those into a pot so that I can boil these eggs with them. I'm just going to try one of each color in each dye, and we'll get those going first, and then we'll start making these individual dyes using heat for everything except for Bougainvillea. We're going to do a cold extraction on that one, which means we're going to have to actually also boil some eggs. I am not going to be doing the poke a hole and blowing out the raw egg. Too much time, never done it, sounds a little scary. So I'll just boil some of these as well so that I can have hard-boiled eggs. But for the most part, I'm going to be using the dyes themselves as the heat source to boil the eggs. So I have two tea bag varieties. I'm going to put these into a pot and heat them up as if I were steeping tea. Then I'm just going to pull the bags out and allow the eggs to go in and boil with the color, just to give them that extra like 20 minutes in heated dye. We're gonna try blue butterfly pea with some dried flowers. And we'll compare the two. Get these on the stove and see what blue this one makes. My boiled eggs that I did alone are now ready. So I'm going to use the cold dyes that I already had made. And here's where I'm going to be adding the vinegar. And this is an age-old recipe about egg dyeing. And I'm going to be putting in 3 tablespoons into each one of these jars. Just going to be adding the dye and then the eggs. I'm going to make labels. It's so easy to think that you're going to remember what they are, but in fact, trust me, you never do. It's the fresh hibiscus that I got from Maryland. Gonna have to drain some off. Put a little too much in. Here's a perfect example about how this could easily be mistaken. Hibiscus fresh, blackberry. They look very similar in color. Definitely need those labels. Checking in on the dried flowers of the blue butterfly pea. Such a beautiful blue. It's a shame that it's a fugitive color, because how awesome would it be to be able to make fiber this color? So simple, but it doesn't stay. This is the hibiscus tea that came from the tea bag, and it's a lot lighter, as you can see. So I'm actually going to go ahead and put the tea bags in, as well as the eggs, just to get some extra steepage. This one has a built-in label right on the tea bag. Blue butterfly pea tea. Ooh, there you go. There's some pH going on right there. So there's a perfect example of a pH sensitive dye matter. So now this is acidic, and it turned that blue pea tea into a beautiful purple color. So you can see the color that it was, and then the color that it became. It will be interesting to see what it does with the eggs. These have been sitting in the steeping, hadn't gotten much color yet. So the white egg that had been in cooking when I was steeping the tea has turned a yellowish color just from the 10-15 minutes it was in there. So I'll be really curious to see what it does. And like the hibiscus tea, I'm going to go ahead and just add those tea bags in. Might as well let them keep on doing their dye magic. Coming over to check on this color. Again, just incredible blue. Since we just saw such a drastic pH shift in the color using the vinegar, I'm going to put in 2 more eggs, and I will then try, as an experiment, because you know me and experiments, to put 1 of the dyes with the vinegar, and then I'll do 1 without, and we'll see what we get, and then we'll have a comparison across those 2. So I've already taken these 2 eggs out. They're cooked. They don't really take on any color just from boiling with them, which is why we're going to go ahead and put them in the refrigerator overnight. But then I'll be able to have those 2, and we can do a cool comparison to see what that vinegar really does, at least with blue pea. So here's the blue butterfly pea that is from dried flowers, the whole flowers, into the vinegar. Magic. This one we're gonna have to label. I don't know if any of our other dye is gonna turn that color. I don't think so, but you never know. So I went ahead and made a label showing that this is the one with vinegar. And then I'll label the other one where we don't put the vinegar in without. Okay, last hibiscus that we're gonna do is with the dried Jamaica hibiscus, which gives that really vivid pinkish red when it comes to fibers, as opposed to that mauve color that the garden variety hibiscus gave us last week. Turn those on, get to steeping. Our last heated dye, we have to start from scratch, is the elderberry. So, as I said, I've never worked with elderberry before. This is probably way too much. I'm super curious about blue elderberry. I have enough that I definitely am gonna do a video in the future seeing about how to dye fiber with it. Because I've only ever used red elderberry, which does not make red, it makes yellow. So, nature, always playing games with us. All in a good way though. Here we have the dry blue pea. Just gonna put it in, and we're not gonna put any vinegar in so that we can see what difference it makes. So far it's just been sitting there. It's like a pretty light green. Into the fridge it goes. Okay, here is the hibiscus. And this is the dried Jamaica hibiscus in the dried flower form. And then we have the elderberry. All these beautiful, rich, dark purple and wine tones. So curious what they're all gonna do. The color of the eggs that boiled with the elderberry really took on a gorgeous color. I love that one. And that was just sitting from boiling in it as I was making the dye itself. Okay, we'll label these up and put them in the fridge. So the last dye that we're going to make is going to be the Bougainvillea dye. And this has to be done as a cold extraction if we want to try to keep this pink color. I have no idea if this is going to work for Easter eggs. I've already boiled these eggs so they're ready to go. But what I'm going to do is start the process of a cold extraction, which if you've seen my other two videos where I worked with Bougainvillea, it's a pretty simple step, but it takes a little bit of time. You put in some flowers, you add water to them, and then you simply start squeezing them. Wow, I just love how quickly that color comes out. So I will work through these to extract as much of this beautiful pink color as I can. Wow, look at that color. It'll be super interesting to see what it does with Easter eggs. So this has been sitting in this water for about 15 minutes. It is so vivid, but I'm going to go ahead and put the eggs in with the flowers. Figured why not? Who knows what'll happen. We'll add some vinegar and the eggs. here are the final dried results of the eggs. And I'll say that I personally love them. It is a very different look and feel than traditional eggs, obviously. They end up with a much more stone feeling and look to them. And as you can see, extremely varied. Some of these, I can't even tell which one is the darker egg and which is the lighter egg. I'm not even sure. So I will mention that a lot of these natural dyes have a tendency to form a very thick coat, and then you can actually rub this off. I took these out halfway through and rubbed off this outer coating and then put them back in. Obviously, the color underneath is a lighter version of whatever this dark color is, but I decided to leave these with their outer layer because I think it's beautiful. They end up having such a gorgeous design and pattern, just random, very natural looking. And I mean, look at this one. Oh my goodness. I love that one. Wow, so beautiful. This was the blue pea with the vinegar in it. And look at that, look at those beautiful speckled marks. And it did turn blue, so the purple didn't really hang out. But these were the ones I didn't put any vinegar in, and they're just this solid, gorgeous green color. But this, I think, is just a very light green over the top of the brown egg, but it's still gorgeous and very uniform. And then, wow, I mean, look at this. If you have Bougainvillea in your garden, get out there and grab some different colors. This is obviously peeled away, but you can still, it's still beautiful pink underneath. But what a vibrant color this is. And that was all done by cold extraction. There was no heat involved whatsoever. I mean, look at that, so pretty, so unique, right? And then I really actually loved these. These are the fresh hibiscus that came from Marilyn's garden in Florida. When they were wet, when I first pulled them out, they really had like a stone cement look to them. They have dried a little bit lighter than they looked. I have never put oil on top of eggs to sort of seal them, but I bet you that would be really beautiful. And that might bring in some of these darker areas. It looked more like that. I mean, look at that. How gorgeous is that? Love it. Okay, well, there you have it. Definitely worth trying if you want to have a varied look and using natural dyes for your Easter eggs. Love them. So which one of those was your favorite? I was absolutely blown away by the Bougainvillea. And if you have seen my recent Bougainvillea ink video, you should go check that out to get some other potential ideas for colors. I wish that I had all of those Bougainvillea colors that I had when I was in Baja, because I bet you I could make 5 or 6 different colors, or rather 10 or 12, because using white eggs versus brown eggs can create a variation in palette. I also really loved the speckled effect that I got from most of the dyes, and it's just so unique and really natural looking. So as with most things, or all things when it comes to the world of natural color, it's always just so gorgeous. I hope you have a wonderful season of dyeing eggs and enjoy some potentially new ideas to try out in your dye pot. And speaking of dye pots, I have had requests from a few people in our amazing Color Quest community asking what I recommend for starting out a dye studio. So next week, join me as we poke around my dye studio and look at some of the go-to items that I have, as well as some extra special things you may decide to have in your dye studio just for fun. Have a great week and happy Easter if that is a celebration that you honor. Otherwise, have a wonderful spring/fall shift of seasons and enjoy those naturally dyed eggs. Where's my spoon? There's my spoon.